Hi there, my name is Bob Judson and you're listening to Leading for Life Stories. I'm delighted you're here and I'm really glad to have you on my podcast, and I very, very much hope you enjoy it. Welcome to episode 7. I can't believe we're up to episode 7 already, and I really hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. The feedback I've had just personally and from some of the messages I've received has been great, but I'd love more. So please do send me feedback if you're listening to this and you think there's things that you really enjoyed, or indeed that you really think weren't so great, then I'd be really, really appreciative of your feedback. Equally, if you can subscribe and review and do all those normal things on the platforms, that will be great too, because it all helps to boost what I'm trying to do with this and get more listeners and more people hopefully benefiting from some of the things that are being said, particularly by the interviewees that I've had, where the feedback's been great, I think, for some of those episodes already. This time it's just me, though. I'm back on my own for the first time in a few weeks, and I wanted to continue my personal story a little bit and bring out some of the key lessons that I've reflected on over the years from, in this particular case, flying training. At the end of the last time I talked about a personal story, I'd really just finished officer training at RAF College Cranwell, and I was just about to embark on this next chapter, which was the flying training journey. And I guess at the start, it's probably worth me just talking about the process itself and the duration of that process, because it's very different now to the way it was then, that's for sure. And now, sadly, I mean, it's been much in the news. You know, there are lots of holdups in the training system. It takes a long time. It's had all sorts of frictions along the way, and that's difficult. And I really feel for those that are caught up in that. Back in my day, way back 1981, I started flying training. There were holds. There were processes where we had gaps between courses occasionally, but they were much, much rarer. And for me, it was actually almost an absence of holds. I had one time, and I'll come to that when I did a brief hold. But the rest of the time, it was rattled through the courses almost at an obscenely fast rate in some ways. So we had to go in terms of process and steps you have to jump through. There were several. The first one is the flying selection squadron, as it was then, the elementary flying training school. And then there's the basic flying training school. Then there's advanced flying training school, which is, in those days, that was when you used to get your wings. And then you went to the tactical weapons unit and you learned to actually operate the aeroplane. And I'll talk more about all of these in a second. And then after that, you actually went to the front line and you headed off to an operational conversion unit to fly a frontline type of aeroplane. This is all the fast jet route. If you went down the multi-engine route or the helicopter route, it was different, and there were different steps. But ultimately, the aim was the same. It was to get you to the point where you embarked on flying on a frontline squadron of whichever persuasion it was, and learning that role and developing in that role. But you never stopped learning. I mean, even as a squadron commander, I never stopped learning for sure. As a kind of last proper combat role in an aeroplane. But the whole of the training system was one long learning machine, and it seemed like a never-ending set of steps on a staircase at the time you're doing it. I was very lucky when I look at the personal journey on several levels. I didn't have to do the flying selection squadron, first thing. I'd done a flying scholarship, and that meant that I'd had a private pilot's license, and I didn't need to go and do the very, very initial step that people go through, which is if you've never done any flying, to see whether you've got any aptitude at all. So the first step for me was basic flying training school at number 1 flying training school at Linton-on-Ouse, RAF Linton-on-Ouse, which was just north of York. A base that's now shut, sadly, but it was a great base. Really, really fun place to be. Lovely locations, centre of the UK, and York's a wonderful city. So we had a great time. And there were 18 of us on the course. We had mostly come from my officer training course, and a mixture of flying experience prior to that. Some had done University Air Squadron. Some had, like me, had done flying scholarships. One or two had done the flying selection squadron as well. So we were all kind of on a relatively level playing field, and we jumped into ground school about 6 weeks long, and not just about flying the airplane. It was all the basics. It was all aerodynamics and meteorology and Morse code we had to learn in those days, and a whole bunch of things that set you along that learning path, which seemed never ending subsequently. And eventually, after 6 weeks or so, you ended up on the squadron about to go flying in an airplane. And that was a big deal. And the course was very intensive. I remember going through it right from the very beginning. You felt the pressure and the intensity of the fact that you seemed to be constantly in the spotlight. And obviously, if you didn't do very well, and I certainly didn't do very well, I'll come back to that in a second, at basic flying training, then it was really hard because that pressure came on really fast. And you suddenly felt that the spotlight really was on you. And if you continued not to deliver, then you ended up on review initially. And from being on review, where obviously you got a greater level of additional flying if you required it, but certainly a greater level of scrutiny. Then if you failed to deliver what was expected at that point, pretty quickly you ended up in the situation where you were being up for a chop ride, in inverted commas, which was literally a pass or fail. So if you failed, that was it. End of course, end of flying career as a pilot, go and do something else. And in those days, some of my friends went to go and be navigators from that situation. Some went out of the Air Force entirely and went back to going doing something totally different and out of the military. It was really hard rules. There were no slots for us to go from Linton-on-Ouse anyway into the multi-engined or helicopter world. So if you failed to go in the fast jet system, then that was it. You were done, and off you went. So it was pretty brutal, and you knew that. But when the spotlight came on hard, it really felt like there was a lot of pressure. And I think that's one of the things that is a learning curve point for me in terms of response to pressure and development of your personal ability, because certainly Linton for me was really tough. I did okay initially for the first 30 hours or so, and then I started to find that it was just really, really hard. And particularly when I got to the tests, I just did not perform well. And I was doing virtually every test more than once, in some instances significantly more than once. So I spent a lot of time on review, I had a lot of additional flying, I had a lot of scrutiny from different instructors. And I really did feel that I was teetering on the edge of a knife to some extent as to whether I actually passed the course or disappeared off it. And ultimately, I got through it. Obviously, as you kind of know the end of the story, and that was great. So, but it was hard, and actually being focused, staying focused and having a really positive mindset was key, absolutely key to making that work. Other real memories from that time was the kind of harsh nature of the world and the dangers of the world we were in. We suffered on the 17th of May, 1982, so relatively near the end of the course for me. Very, very sadly, a chap called Flight Lieutenant Rob Rogers, who was one of the instructors, was killed displaying. He was practicing the Jet Provost display right over the airfield. I didn't see it. Luckily, I was back in the officers' mess by that stage. It was the end of the day. But a lot of my friends did see it. They'd stayed down to watch his display practice. And he crashed out of one of the maneuvers and didn't eject from the airplane and was killed instantly. And the thing that really stuck in my memory more than anything else was the next day was a flying day. It was straight back to the office, and the old expression "the show must go on" was never true, because the chief instructor at that point stood up and he said, "Right, okay, guys, you got to get used to the fact these kind of things happen in the Air Force. So we've got a revised taxi pattern for today, so we can't get out to the main runway the way we normally do because the wreckage is lying on that part of the taxiway. So this is how we're going to do it." And we walked out to go and get in the airplanes on our sorties that day, and you're looking at wreckage of one of those aircraft that was strewn across the airfield, including the ejection seat was still there. Obviously, all this stuff gets left in place for the Board of Inquiry to come and look and scrutinize and understand exactly what went on, and for the Air Accident Investigation Branch to look at it. And that was really tough. That was a kind of hard lesson that you were looking at the realities of a flying accident right in front of your eyes, and then you'll just basically get back in the airplane and continue as though nothing had happened. And sadly, that wasn't the last time that happened. Obviously, in my career, in those days, it was a pretty dangerous game. So, but it was definitely a hard lesson. I think the other one that was a hard lesson was the fact that we finished the course with 9 people. We started with 18. We finished with 9. Half of us had failed. Half of us had been chopped along the way, some earlier, some later. And some of those, as I say, went on to be navigators, did very successfully actually as navigators, and were in the Air Force for a long time thereafter. But some left and went back out to the civilian world, more or less straight away. And you got a real sense that, wow, this is a tough life. We've got half the people we started with, and now fortunately at the end of the course, where my very final trip was a chop ride. I'd failed my final handling test, just about in common with every other test I'd done on that course. And I flew with the chief instructor. We climbed out of the airplane, and as we were walking back across the tarmac to go back into the squadron, he said to me, "Well, Bob, how do you think you did?" And I sort of looked at him slightly quizzically, and because I didn't want to commit, and he said, 60%'s a pass. Anything less than that is a fail, and you've finished, and that's it. And anything more than that, you're off to Valley. And I said, "Well, I guess it's 60% then, sir." And he said, "Yeah, I'll drink to that." And so with that, I was through basic flying training and off to go to Valley, RAF Valley and Anglesey, home still to this day of advanced flying training. It's doing more now than it used to do then, but a lot of it is very, very similar. And we had a short gap between the two courses, but not very much. And given the intensity of the course, that really felt quite pressured, that you'd just about had time to kind of adjust your brain to you're going off to the next stage of the course. And I think on reflection over the years, as I've looked back at that, then my ability to soak up pressure and to cope and be forward looking and not look back at forks in the road and dwell on past things really made a difference to whether I succeeded or not at Linton. I think if I'd not had that kind of mindset, it would have been tough to push on through it, because knock after knock after knock was there. You're really feeling that hurts. And, am I good enough? Am I just pushing too hard here? And I shouldn't really be doing this. Or, should I go and look for doing something else? It would have been easy to do that, but I didn't. And and I'm very pleased. Obviously I didn't, because it set the conditions for the rest of my career. Valley was a totally different story. It was amazing. Once again, it was ground school to go and learn to fly the Hawk. The Hawk is effectively a proper fast jet, whereas we'd been flying on the basic flying training course, learning to fly an airplane, essentially straight and level first, then turns, then bring those turns back into be able to fly it into the circuit and operate in the circuit, turn around finals, bring it in, land it, take it off, all that basic stuff. And then building in instrument flying, basic instrument flying to be able to fly in cloud, building in eventually formation flying, lots and lots of navigation, medium level navigation, and then steadily low level navigation. And and bringing in night flying and other such skills that are all raw material for any pilot that you need to have. But the JP, even the JP5 was a pretty modest aeroplane in performance terms. It would do 300 knots at low level, and very basic, very, very basic, all entirely map and stopwatch and raw navigation looking out the window. To do what you were doing. The Hawk was similar in that respect. The avionics were pretty basic on the Hawk T1, which was the one I was flying then, the same one the Red Arrows still fly now. But the aeroplane itself was just a totally different animal. It was a sports car. 420 knots at low level was our routine speed. It would go significantly faster than that. Would go just about go supersonic in a dive. We would take it through the Mach occasionally, to just because you could, but it wasn't a proper supersonic airplane. But by goodness, it was quick compared to the JP. And immediately you stepped into the airplane, having done the ground school. We knew you're operating at another level. There was an expectation of there's no respite here. There's no room for resting on your laurels of having finished at Linton. It's straight back on, full speed, back into to get back onto the next level of flying. And it was a significant step up in every sense, because keeping up with the airplane, having the mental capacity to be ahead of the aircraft rather than sitting on the tailplane, as some people used to describe it, where you're always reacting behind it. If you drive, you'll recognize this. If you're pushing beyond your performance threshold, you're going faster than you're comfortable with. That's the same in the flying world, but obviously on steroids to some extent. And so it was really tough. You had all the challenges, the same kind of flying skills to do. So we jumped straight in this time into handling it, and obviously learning how to handle it and do all of the things that we would do with that. Aerobatics, spinning. Obviously, we were beyond the kind of straight and level and just raw turning bit. Very quickly, we were into, right, okay, now get on with it. fly it around, get into the circuit, land it, be able to land it without an engine, forced landings, which we did on the JP as well. But the Hawk was a much more difficult aeroplane to force land in many ways than the Jet Provost had been. So the whole thing was just a significant step up. And then formation again and low flying again, but this time much faster with more pressure. All the guys that, they were all guys in those days, there were no female pilots who were teaching us to fly at Valley were all fast jet pilots. They had all come from the fast jet front line. That had not been the case in what we were doing at Linton, where actually a lot of the pilots who were teaching us had come from other bits of the Air Force establishment. So they were flying VC-10s or Hercules or transport aircraft as opposed to fast jets. We did have some fast jet guys, and we also, in both Valley and Linton, you had what are called creamed off QFIs. So people who'd gone through the training system to the end of Valley, got their wings at the end of the Valley course, and then immediately been told, right, you're going to go back and be an instructor. Very nearly happened to me, actually. Another story, come back to that in a minute. But I'm very glad it didn't happen to me in all sorts of ways. I ended up going on from Valley to the front line. The difference, though, in having an all-fast jet instructor cadre was huge. I mean, it made a really big difference to their knowledge about what we were going on to, their expectation of what we could do. They knew what the front line was like, and they knew whether we were going to fit there or not. And that was really important. And the bonding and the personality and the kind of type of people you were mattered enormously, because it's not just about getting in the airplane and flying it. You actually have to fit in on a frontline squadron and be part of that community and be an acceptable part of that community with the right mindset, the right attitude, the right level of self-awareness, all those kind of things that were important. So that was all part of the subliminal stuff that was going on in the margins. And I have to say, the interesting thing, having said how difficult the time was at Linton, and I've sort of alluded to this in suggesting that I very nearly ended up going back as an instructor myself. I sailed through Valley. I was I think I am one of these people who's I just developed quite late in terms of the skill set, and I found flying the Hawk was just a joy. I really, really enjoyed it. I got on really well with it. I had a great set of instructors, and I absolutely loved what we did there. And the net result was, having gone through Linton, where everything was a struggle, and the only bright spot at the end of it was I actually won the aerobatics trophy. We did a competition right at the very end of the Linton course, and I out of my course mates, I was the one who put together the best aerobatic sequence and won the trophy, which was a really wonderful thing at the end. After what had been quite a difficult course at Valley, I got to the end of it and I won the flying trophy as the best student pilot on the course, which, I mean, it blew me away in many ways, in that, I think I'd scraped through Linton by the skin of my teeth. Wouldn't have surprised me at all if I'd actually failed it and disappeared off the grid entirely from a flying point of view. But I didn't. I passed and then get to Valley, sail through Valley, totally different environment, and win the flying trophy. Who would have predicted? Absolutely extraordinary. And still to this day, it fills me with a kind of amazement that that's what ended up happening to me. Luckily, they took pity on me because I was still positively youthful at this stage. I think we were finishing Valley very early 1983, so I was 20 and a bit, not quite 21, and was therefore deemed too young. And one of the big things, of course, that happens at the end of Valley is you get your wings. In those days, that was where we got them. Nowadays, it's slightly earlier in the process, and it's just a different thing. But it is a huge, huge moment when you get your wings. I talked about it already in terms of imposter syndrome and the reflection on that. But that was just massive. And I still remember that day with immense pride. And my mum was there to witness it. And that was just wonderful. It was an incredible experience to feel that, you've kind of, it's a big step up the mountain, but at the same time, you then look up and there's a hell of a lot of mountains still to go. And you knew that, you climbed one, but there's the rest of the range, I suppose, was ahead of you. And we had a whole weekend off between finishing RAF Valley and getting to the next stage, where we split the course that we had. So all 9 of us from Linton had gone on to Valley and were there at the same time. And then in those days, there were 2 places where you went for the tactical weapons unit. One was RAF Chivenna in Devon, and the other one was RAF Brawdy, which was in southwest Wales near Haverfordwest. I went to Brawdy, and literally finished Valley on a Friday, started at Brawdy on the Monday. So no respite at all. It was literally pack up and move. In those days, luckily, I had my entire worldly goods fitted in my car, which was by this stage was a Ford Capri, 1.6 Ford Capri. And so I set off from Valley to drive down through Wales, get to Brawdy, unpack, ready to start on Monday morning. And we're in Brawdy, the tactical weapons unit. The difference here was really stark. So this was now strike command. This was no longer support command. We'd moved into the frontline command of the Air Force, and the airplanes were camouflaged. They were wraparound camouflage, just like the fast jets on the front line. And now we're learning to fight the airplane. We're not learning to fly the airplane. That's a given. You've now got to the point where you've got your driving license, your wings have been pinned on your chest. You are still learning, still improving, still developing your flying skill as ever. But actually, it's all about operating the airplane now. So the course was, immense fun, but immensely challenging because we were doing things we'd never done before. We're flying the same airplane. The airplane was identical, but it was a really, really massive step in terms of doing lots of weaponry. So we would go to do lots of bombing with practice bombs, 3-kilogram practice bombs, dropping those on Pembrey Range on the South Welsh coast. Lots of strafe. We had a 30mm cannon on the bottom of the airplane. And learning the techniques, being safe, being able to do the weaponeering properly was paramount. But then the other really big thing we started introducing at that stage was low-level formation flying, battle formation flying, tactical formation flying, which is the bedrock of all Air Force formation flying really to this day. Flying in tactical formations is what it's all about. And getting that skill set underway early, being able to do that, understand how to properly operate the airplane against a threat aircraft, which they started introducing after we'd learned the basics of being able to operate at low level in formation, to then work with an aggressor against you who's coming in, who's basically trying to simulate shooting you down, and you've got to obviously see him and defeat him and find a way to actually avoid him. We also did a lot of combat. We took the airplane at a higher level. Now you go up and actually actively fight against each other. So 1v1, and then ultimately introducing 2v1 combat to turn around and build up your ability again to fight and operate the airplane in its fairly basic mode. This is an airplane that doesn't have a radar. It didn't have in those days actual missiles and things like that. It was all very much learning the techniques and being able to apply them safely, being able to operate intelligently, and again, be ahead of the airplane, build that capacity that pushed you into a space where you were comfortable and really comfortable in the airplane. And it was just, again, enormous fun, very satisfying flying. And the camouflage jet thing really made a difference. You felt different. You're getting in the same airplane, but you've now got wings on and you're getting in a camouflage jet. And somehow that just, for me at least, that just changed the game. It was this was now getting much more real. It was getting much more punchy in terms of being closer to the front line. And again, it was just wonderful to do. There were three of us, two of my course mates and me, who actually finished that course as pilot officers. So when you first graduate from Cranwell, if you join as a direct entrant, you're an acting pilot officer for a year, and then you become a pilot officer for another year, and then you become a flying officer, which is just a rank progression. And these are automatic promotions. But three of us finished Brawdy as pilot officers, which was quite extraordinary. It hadn't happened for forever and a day, as far as I can remember. And there were articles in the Royal Air Force News about it and that sort of thing, because we had really gone through so quickly through the flying training system that it was amazing. And I contrast that with what I said earlier on about the delays and so on people face now. And I think we were incredibly fortunate when I look back on it as to how swiftly we did go through. Two incidents that I think are worth talking about just before I get to the end, though. One was at Valley, which I didn't mention earlier. I'd mentioned the accident we'd had at Linton, where obviously one of the instructors was killed. When we were in ground school at Valley, the course, immediate senior course to us, one of the students was killed in an accident, and the instructor who was flying with an instructor in the back seat, that instructor is actually still a very good friend of mine, and he was terribly badly hurt, the instructor, but the student was killed. And I can remember, again, that was another shockwave moment where it was going through the course. We're still in the ground school. We haven't started flying this airplane yet. And it really did ram it home to you that this was a challenging world. And if you didn't know that already, then it was time to wake up and smell that coffee, because it was definitely difficult. And the other interesting incident was we had at Brawdy, we had one phase where we did night flying. It was really a bit of a tick in the box. So we could actually say we'd done some night flying on the course, and we had to do a duel. And then we went and did a solo trip. And they allocated a couple of nights to get everybody through on these two trips. And night flying, because we didn't routinely night fly on the base, it was a whole faff in terms of getting everything sorted out to make it work. And when I was doing my dual trip, I really didn't feel very well at all. Physically, I just didn't feel very good. I thought, I'm definitely coming down with something here. I don't feel good. And I was talking to my instructor about it when we were airborne, and also when we landed, because the idea was I was literally going to turn around, have a quick drink, and then get back in an airplane, go off and do a solo sortie. And I said, you know what, I'm really not sure I'm up for doing this. I feel really quite shabby. And he kind of implored me to go and do it. He said, look, if you don't do it now, it's going to be such a pain if we have to find another time for you to do a night solo later in the course. If you can do it, that would be great. Are you sure you're not up to it? Anyway, so I went and did it. And I felt dreadful the whole sortie. I really didn't feel great at all. And I got back and I landed. Everything was fine. And the next morning I went to the doctor. And the doctor took one look at me and said, have you had mumps? And I said, yeah, I think I have had mumps. Said, well, you've got mumps again. And I just subsequently found out you can have mumps twice. You can have it down one side and then you have it down another side. Now, mumps as a guy, as I was then in my early 20s, is not a great thing. And it's also, of course, it's seriously infectious disease. Therefore, the risk of passing it on was very high. So I suddenly found myself isolated in the room and then sent home to go and recover. My instructor, when I got back, he was mortified because he felt he pressured me to go and fly. And undoubtedly, he had pressured me to go and fly. And I had capitulated. And I think there's a few interesting reflection points that I'm going to come to as we kind of wrap this up, because the bottom line at the end of Brawdy was the end of the kind of mainstream, if you like, flying training process. And the final thing that happens is you get, assuming you pass the course, of course, is you get streamed, you get roll disposed onto an aircraft type. So it's then, where are you now going to go? And in those days, we had quite a few options. We had the Harrier, the Jaguar, the Lightning with the single seat types. The Tornado was just coming in. The Buccaneer was definitely in. The Phantom was also there, and the Canberra. And all of those were where potentially you could go. And we'd previously made choices, wish lists of where we wanted to go. And of course, the challenge was always you didn't really know what it was like on those frontline units. You knew some people that had been there, and you talked to some people, and you had a kind of a gut feel of some of it, but you didn't really know. And I'd chosen to go, I'd asked to go to the Jaguar, which I did end up going to the Jaguar. I found myself, much to my astonishment, being recommended to go to the Harrier, which at that stage was the kind of the top end roll disposal. It was considered the original Harrier, the GR3 Harrier, was considered the most challenging airplane in terms of flying it as well as operating it, because obviously as well as doing all the normal stuff, it did the vertical and short takeoff and landing work. And it had quite a lot of handling vices, as did the Jaguar, to be fair, and the Lightning. So all three of the single seat types were challenging without a shadow of a doubt. But there were no Harrier slots, so I ended up going to the Jaguar. I have to say, I've never regretted that. I've got some very dear friends who are in the Harrier Force, but we have a very, very healthy level of banter between the Jaguar Force and the Harrier Force, and always have had. And I suspect always will have, to be honest, for as long as we're alive, because it was a great rivalry at the time. But so I found myself going off to the Jaguar, and that was going to be my next destiny. And I'll make that the subject of another episode when I start stepping out into that world, because it was a big chunk of time. But just before I finish, I think there's a few things to summarize from this. When I look back across what was essentially 2 years worth of flying and 2 years worth of very high pressure activity, the things that I think are worthy of taking forward and thinking about for you, maybe as a listener here, your own pressure valves. How well do you respond to pressure? How do you react to that? What do you do when the chips are down? How do you get yourself to a place where you're able to bounce back from disappointment and look forward, not back, and continue to stay positive and focused and in a challenging environment? That's one. And the second one is the reality of what you do. And I talked about the flying accidents. I mean, that was definitely a big moment for all of us at the time, when where we suddenly had that huge wake up call that this is not a game. This is a thing where people lose their lives, and And these are just training accidents. There were no wars or anything here. This was tough. So that was the second big thing. And the third one for me was finishing Valley and winning the flying trophy, coming out of all of that on the back of what had been a really dire start to my flying at Linton, was how much persistence pays off and how much a difference it makes. If I hadn't been focused, positive, persistent, willing to really keep looking forward, keep, getting up in the morning and saying, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get through it. I'm going to really have a positive mindset. I wouldn't have done. And so that positive mental attitude really, really does make a difference. No question about it. And the final point is really bringing back on the mumps thing, is how you respond to pressure and I don't mean the sort of pressure that I'm talking about earlier on, where just the pressure of the overall system, but in that instance, pressure to do something that you're uncomfortable with, you think's not the right thing to do, and in this particular instance, it was based around a medical thing, but it could have been something else. It definitely is something to think about, and I think again, if you've prepped your mind in advance for that, that really helps. It really gets you to a place where you can be more aware of yourself. You're more aware of what kind of responses you're going to have. You can be more measured in the way you respond as well. And this is all part of life's lessons for me. I mean, I look back on it now and I think how I might have reacted differently if I'd been in the same situation again later on. I probably would have reacted very differently to it. That's it for this one. I hope that's been really, at least interesting, and hope some useful little snippets in there as well. I will continue to do these personal journey ones because the feedback from them is that people like them. So you can tell me if you think differently, or you'd like me to do some different stuff, or indeed if you'd like to put more emphasis on something, then I'm very happy to do that, because I think there's lots and lots of things from the journey that I look back on now that I think are really important life lessons that I would have quite liked someone to have told me about earlier on in the in my career and in a world before podcasts and all the things we have now. So if that's useful to you, then I'm very pleased. I very, very much look forward to catching you again for another one of these episodes before very long. Thank you very much indeed for listening. If you've got this far, I really appreciate it. Take care.